What if I told you that for 40 years, the United States government actively withheld a cure from hundreds of its own citizens, watching them suffer and die from a treatable disease, all in the name of science? This isn't a dystopian novel. This is the horrific, true story of the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, an experiment so monstrous it forever changed the face of medical ethics. It began not with malice, but with a problem. In the early 20th century, the American South was a landscape of deep poverty and systemic segregation. For African American communities, particularly in rural areas like Macon County, Alabama, quality health care was a distant dream. Public health officials were grappling with a widespread syphilis epidemic. At the time, syphilis was a terrifying disease, shrouded in stigma and with brutal, often fatal consequences. The treatments were archaic, involving toxic heavy metals like mercury and arsenic, which were often as dangerous as the disease itself. In 1929, a partnership between the U.S. Public Health Service, or PHS, and the philanthropic Rosenwald Fund launched a project in 6 southern states to find and treat people with syphilis. It was, at its outset, a legitimate public health initiative. They set up clinics, tested thousands of people in Macon County, and began the arduous process of treatment. It was a beacon of hope in a community that had been medically neglected for generations. But then, the world changed. The Great Depression struck, and the stock market crash of 1929 wiped out the funding. The Rosenwald Fund pulled out, and the PHS was left with a massive data set on hundreds of men infected with syphilis, but no money to continue their treatment. It was at this moment that a group of doctors saw not a tragedy, but an opportunity. A dark, twisted opportunity. They asked a chilling question. What would happen if syphilis was left to run its natural course in the human body? The medical community at the time held deeply racist and scientifically baseless beliefs that syphilis affected black and white bodies differently. These PHS doctors decided to prove it. And so in 1932, the project was reborn with a new secret objective. It was no longer a treatment program. It was now a non-therapeutic study, an experiment in human suffering. They recruited 600 black men from Macon County. 399 of them had latent syphilis. The other 201 served as a control group. The men were never told the truth. They were never told they had syphilis. Instead, they were told they had bad blood, a vague, local catch-all term for everything from anemia to fatigue. The government doctors, these figures of authority they were taught to trust, promised them free medical care for this bad blood. This promise was an irresistible lure for impoverished sharecroppers who had never had access to consistent health care. They were offered free physical exams, free rides to and from the clinic, hot meals on examination days, and perhaps the most powerful incentive of all, a burial stipend. For a one-time payment of $50 to their families, the study would cover their funeral expenses. In a life of crushing poverty, the promise of a dignified burial was a profound relief. The men eagerly signed up, believing they were finally receiving the help they so desperately needed. They had no idea they were walking into a 4-decade-long nightmare. The deception was meticulous and all-encompassing. The men would be brought in for regular checkups, where doctors would observe and document the slow, agonizing progression of their disease. They were given pills, tonics, and ointments, all of which were placebos like aspirin or mineral supplements, completely ineffective against syphilis. The most barbaric procedure was the spinal tap. The men were told this was a special, free treatment. A letter sent to the participants advertised the procedure with a terrifyingly cheerful tone. Last chance for special free treatment. In reality, it was a painful and risky diagnostic test to look for signs of neurosyphilis. The doctors needed the spinal fluid for their data. The men endured the excruciating pain of a large needle being inserted into their backs, all under the illusion that it was helping them. They were guinea pigs, their bodies nothing more than data points in a long-term study on death. At the heart of this deception was a woman named Eunice Rivers. She was a black public health nurse hired by the PHS and became the central point of contact for the men over the study's entire 40-year span. Nurse Rivers, as she was known, was a trusted figure in the community. She knew the men and their families. She drove them to their appointments, brought them their placebo medicines, and sat with them during their examinations. Her presence lent an air of legitimacy and care to the entire operation. She was instrumental in maintaining the men's trust and ensuring they kept coming back, year after year. Her role remains one of the most complex and debated aspects of the study, a black woman complicit in the exploitation of black men, caught in an impossible position of professional duty and devastating betrayal. As the years turned into decades, the world of medicine advanced at a lightning pace. By the mid-1940s, a miracle drug had arrived, penicillin. It was discovered to be a safe, cheap, and highly effective cure for syphilis. By 1947, it was the standard treatment across the globe. The PHS doctors running the Tuskegee study were fully aware of this. They knew they held the key to ending the suffering of the men they were studying. But stopping the study would mean losing their precious data on the natural progression of the disease. So they made a conscious, calculated decision to not only withhold the cure, but to actively prevent the men from getting it anywhere else. This is where the experiment descended into unambiguous evil. The researchers compiled a list of the 399 infected participants and sent it to the Alabama State Health Department and local doctors, with explicit instructions to never treat these men for syphilis. When some of the men were drafted to fight in World War II, the military diagnosed them with syphilis and ordered them to report for treatment. The PHS intervened, exempting the men from the order to ensure they remained untreated. They took every possible step to guarantee that their subjects would continue to deteriorate. The human cost was catastrophic. Without treatment, syphilis is a devastating disease. It attacks the body from the inside out, slowly and relentlessly. The men in the study suffered from its brutal late-stage symptoms. They developed heart problems, painful bone and joint deformities, and severe skin lesions. Many went blind. Others descended into madness as the disease attacked their brains, a condition known as neurosyphilis. Dozens died directly from syphilis. Many more died from related complications. The horror did not end with them. The men unknowingly infected their wives. At least 40 spouses contracted the disease. And in the most tragic turn of all, at least 19 children were born with congenital syphilis, condemned to a life of health problems because of a government-sponsored lie. One of the participants, Charlie Pollard, later recalled his confusion and trust. He said, "We were told that we had bad blood. They said we'd get a free doctor, free medicine. We trusted them." That trust was their undoing. For 40 years, the study continued in the shadows, published in medical journals and presented at conferences, a grotesque open secret within the public health service. But secrets like this cannot stay buried forever. In 1966, a young PHS venereal disease investigator in San Francisco named Peter Buxton was hired. He was a former soldier, a sharp and inquisitive man. While reviewing medical literature, he stumbled upon reports about the Tuskegee study. He was immediately alarmed. As he dug deeper, his alarm turned to sheer horror. He couldn't believe that in modern America, a study like this could be happening. He raised his concerns internally with his superiors at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the successor to the PHS. He wrote letters, he argued, he pleaded. He was told to stand down. The official response was that the study was too important to stop. They argued that the men were too far gone for treatment to be effective, a claim later proven false. They said the scientific data they were gathering was invaluable. They told him the study must continue until every last man had died and been autopsied. Peter Buxton refused to accept this. He saw it for what it was, an immoral, racist atrocity. After his official protests were repeatedly dismissed, he knew he had to go outside the system. In 1972, after years of wrestling with his conscience, he made a fateful decision. He contacted a friend who worked at the Associated Press, who put him in touch with an investigative reporter named Jean Heller. Buxton told her everything. He laid out the entire sordid history of the study, the lies, the deception, the withheld cures. Heller was stunned. She meticulously verified his story through official documents and interviews. On the morning of July 26, 1972, the story broke. The headline on the front page of the New York Times read, "Syphilis victims in U.S. study went untreated for 40 years." The public reaction was instantaneous and explosive. It was a firestorm of shock, disgust, and outrage. How could the United States government, which had just prosecuted Nazi doctors at Nuremberg for unethical human experimentation, be guilty of something so similar on its own soil? The story became a global scandal. Congressional hearings were immediately launched, led by Senator Ted Kennedy. Top officials from the PHS and CDC were called to testify. They tried to defend their actions, citing the scientific norms of 1932. But their justifications crumbled under the weight of their 40-year deception, especially the deliberate act of withholding penicillin. An advisory panel was formed, and within months, they concluded the study was ethically unjustified and ordered it to be stopped at once. After 40 long years of suffering, the Tuskegee study was finally over, but the fight for justice was just beginning. The NAACP filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of the study's victims and their families, led by a brilliant civil rights attorney named Fred Gray. Gray had previously represented Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. He argued that the government had violated the men's constitutional rights. In 1974, the government settled the lawsuit out of court for $10 million. More importantly, the settlement mandated that the U.S. government provide lifetime medical and health benefits to all living participants, as well as to the wives, widows, and children who had been affected. The fallout from the Tuskegee study sent shockwaves through the entire field of medical research. The scandal forced a national reckoning with the ethics of human experimentation. In 1974, Congress passed the National Research Act. This landmark legislation created a national commission to oversee and regulate all research involving human subjects. It established 3 core ethical principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Crucially, it enshrined the principle of informed consent into federal law. No longer could a person be enrolled in a study without being fully informed of its risks and benefits and giving their explicit, voluntary permission. It also mandated the creation of institutional review boards, or IRBs, at any institution receiving federal funding for research. These boards are responsible for reviewing and approving all study protocols to ensure they are ethically sound and that participants are protected. The laws and regulations that protect every single person who participates in a clinical trial today were born directly from the ashes of Tuskegee. Decades passed. The men grew old. Many of them carried the physical and psychological scars of the experiment for the rest of their lives. Finally, on May 16, 1997, the nation offered a formal apology. President Bill Clinton hosted the 5 remaining survivors of the study at the White House. In a moving ceremony, he spoke directly to them. "What was done cannot be undone," he said, "but we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful and I am sorry." Herman Shaw, one of the survivors, stood and accepted the apology, saying, "We were treated unfairly to some extent like guinea pigs. I'm asking my friends, my fellow Americans, please don't be afraid. Go to the doctor. The world is not like it was." His words highlighted the deepest, most enduring legacy of the Tuskegee study, a profound and justified distrust of the medical establishment among African Americans. This isn't just a historical footnote. The shadow of Tuskegee looms large even today. It's a primary driver of the documented racial disparities in healthcare. It's the reason why many in the Black community are hesitant to participate in clinical trials, which limits our understanding of how diseases and treatments affect different populations. This historical trauma fueled skepticism and hesitancy during the recent global pandemic. The fear that they are once again being used as guinea pigs is a direct echo of the betrayal in Macon County. The Tuskegee study is a brutal lesson in the dangers of unchecked authority, the poison of systemic racism, and the catastrophic consequences of science without a soul. It stands as a permanent, chilling reminder that the road to atrocity is often paved with the cold logic of scientific progress. We must never forget the 600 men who were promised care and given only deception. We must remember their names, their stories, and their suffering to ensure that such a profound violation of human trust and dignity never, ever happens again.